Is everybody still awake? Or do we need to do some exercises? No. Not need anymore, okay.
I'll try to keep it light, I promise.
So last but not least is Yannick. And guess what? He is from Telesoftas. So you see their branding all over in this place. Yeah, and guess what? He has the biggest support team from his company here. So let's cheer it up.
My own cheerleading squad.
Yeah. So I'm not going to waste any more time, so stage is yours.
Cool, thank you. Hello, everyone. So yes, I'm Yannick. I am a Scrum Master and Agile Lead in Telesoftas. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about how to foster partnerships between your teams and your clients. Maybe you've heard these things before. You ask a question to any Scrum team, you ask what are you guys doing? And well, I guess everything that's in the sprint backlog. So what value are you creating? I don't know, client asked something. We have no idea why, but he asked for it, so we'll do it. Okay, are you happy with everything? Well, sort of, but client doesn't really care what we're doing. We don't really care what client is doing. They don't really know what we're dealing with, so it's kind of whatever. Today I want to talk a little bit what's behind that and what you can do as leaders of your team to try and give some context and actually change the mind of your team a little bit, and the clients as well. So before we go further, there is this Menti thing. So if you want to give feedback on either my presentation or myself, here's the code. It'll be shared at the end too, so you can do that as well. Well, let's start properly, shall we? So I want to talk about three different things. So what controlling tools there are between stakeholders and teams, how we can create understanding from the development aspect, and how we actually can create some understanding for the business value of things. Let's start with the first one. It's working? Yes, control, or I like to call it the illusion of control. This is something that probably most of you have seen many, many times. So who here has some kind of delivery meetings or roadmap with their clients? Several people, yeah. In those delivery meetings or sprint reviews or something of the sort, these often get used. And before I go further, don't get me wrong, these can be very valuable, as in to analyze risks, analyze your team process, what's going wrong, where can we improve. But they're also very easily misused to control your team. I'll start with the obvious one. It starts with story points. Story points are an estimation. Estimations are by default wrong because they're called estimations for a reason. However, if you go to a stakeholder and say hey, my team committed to 90 story points, translation, so 90, so by the end of the sprint, you guys will reach 0 and everything is good. Now let's say I'll take this one to the sprint review, and this is from my team, and by the way, everything I'm going to be talking about is things that I'm either in progress of developing in my team or I'm doing actively. The question is going to be okay, what happened at the end, and why is everything not 0? Is your team underperforming? Second question, well, it starts somewhat off at the beginning, but why is the red line not following the gray line perfectly? Is your team underperforming? To both, my answer would be well, no, they're not, but you can't really tell because you just misinterpret the list. For instance, where is my sprint goal? There is no sprint goal. Where is the value that I've created for the team, or the team created for the stakeholder? Also not visible. Similar thing, so was someone sick? You don't know. Did we do any bug fixes? Doesn't show up. Did we do any investigation spikes for that thing you want 3 months from now? Also doesn't show up. So stakeholders might say, yeah, your team is not doing well enough, and I'd be well, no, that's not entirely true. So let's look at a couple scenarios. I've mentioned value is missing. Okay, fine, value is missing. So let's go to 2 different scenarios. Cool, team number 1, velocity is 40 story points. They did everything. Yay, team is performing great. And on the other end, I'm okay, can we push this to production? The client can see it? Well, no, it's all little separate things. We can't actually do anything. Second team, they only completed 30 out of 40 story points. Common is you guys are not performing. Why is it not 40? And then me as a Scrum Master, yeah, but there's 2 functionalities up and running on production. So are you entirely correct that they're underperforming? I think for me, it's pretty clear which one would be the more performing team from an Agile perspective. On the other thing, math can be deceiving. So not only do you have burn downs, but we have also the velocity I mentioned. Again, two situations. Team X, velocity of 20 story points. You go and dig a little bit deeper and see like how they have to split it up. And they have like 2 stories of 8 story points, 1 of 3 and 1 of 1. Cool, everything completed. But then you have Team 2, also velocity of 20 story points. Oh, they're equally agile, they're equally performing. But then you go look and they have 2 stories of 5, and 1 of 3, 3 stories of 2 story points, and 1 of 1. I, for myself, would prefer to work with the second one, because the risk is much better handled, everything is in smaller chunks being delivered, so there's a much, much higher chance of actually delivering value. Now, the second one, this is not only a business problem or for stakeholders, this is also a team thing, because as soon as velocity comes going and teams are like, oh, well, based on the last couple sprints, we did for the 20 story points, that should be our average. And then there's like, well, we're fine with like 2 times 8 story points. Well, maybe not. So for that, I used an experiment. I think it's flipped. I'll go back to that. I did the fruit bowl experiment. Bear with me, it actually worked. The first reaction I got from the team was like, what on earth is this? So I moved story points to fruit. 1 story point is a grape, 2 story points is a mandarin, 3 is an apple, all the way to 13 is a melon. I don't go higher than that, because in the team we have an environment, like we don't go over that. If it's higher than 13, like it's a no-go anyway. So 13 is the one that made most sense. So then we did the same thing with their sprints, and we said, okay, fine. So in team 1, you have 2 pineapples, an apple, and a grape. But team 2 has like 2 bananas, an apple, 3 mandarins, and a grape. And the discussion starts. Like, which would you rather eat with like a group of people, and what would actually be the easiest to just eat and finish? I was like, well, obviously the second one. So, well, doesn't that then also mean that if you do the same with story points, you can release things better and easily? Took about 2-3 sprints to actually catch on, but eventually, yep, it got on. But, adding fruit to Jira tickets, not that great. It gives a weird view, so eventually they wanted to go back to story points. But for story points, we had some issues, and for that, I made the estimation matrix. It's the technique that my guys love and we're still using today. What's behind this? I don't know how your refinement meetings go, but initially when we had our refinement meetings, and in my setup, we have a dashboard, we have a mobile app, we have a backend fully up and running, so trying to get anything done, it's like, well, let's refine the tickets, and then we have an hour refinement meeting planned. 3 tickets in. Okay, we're already half an hour in, and we still have like 20 tickets to go. We're like, what on earth do we do? I'm not happy. Product owner's not happy. Team is like, no, we don't really want to have another meeting. So we tried coming up with a new way, and I came up with this. It makes things easier in the sense that for every task that we do, we go through these 4 questions. Initially, we had more, so I did do a full workshop with the team, like what questions make sense, what not. I think we had 8 at the beginning, and we distilled it down to 4. And why 4 specific questions is, one of the reasons that refinements take very long is because the team tries to do the effort of or complexity of a task, and they're trying to solve way too many things at once. There's too many, the criteria are very vague, and it ends up being more of a discussion like, okay, whose estimation is actually more right than the other guy, which leads to nothing. In this case, we just go through, and then the team only has to decide on 1 question at a time, as in like, how many unknowns are there? Disclaimer, this is not unknowns on business side, this is unknowns from development side. So let's say, okay, we have too many unknowns, so it's 8 story points. Okay. At that point, I can already be like, well, if from an own perspective, it's already 8, like, there's no need to go through the other 3, because, like, best case scenario, it's going to be an equal 8, so it's 8 anyway, so we have to take it back and maybe do a spike. If it's a bit lower, it's like, say, minimal, okay, then we'll go to effort, it's some refactoring, like, minimal risks. Oh, very risky, we might break the system. Well, then the first 3 don't really matter that much. The risk is the one that actually has the highest value, so it's also 8 story points, so why plan it? Adding that up, having a discussion about like, hey, we only disagree about refactoring part, or we only disagree about the risks, or only about effort or unknown, it's much easier to get people to align like 1 single question rather than the entire thing. And I think in about 2 refinement sessions, our refinement session went from multiple sessions to doing everything in about 45 minutes with a somewhat stable velocity as well. So in my book, high success, and I'm actually very happy with that. Jumping quickly back to my previous slide. There we go. Some improvements that I wanted to add for the sprint review. So now that we have refinements a bit under control, a bit more clearer story points. So what can we do in the actual review meeting to actually make sure that context is given? So towards stakeholder, make it not about the burn down, but make it about what value is actually delivered. Maybe instead of sharing the burn down, you start with the demo from developers. And you say, hey, this is what we did. This is what it looks like. Show like the mobile app or maybe whatever website you're making. And show it to share that the stakeholders, this is the value that we made. Add a section there to review the roadmap, as in like, with this value created, we shifted this much in, and then this is where the overall status is. And then maybe add the burn down later if you still see value there, but then make that about, okay, but the burn down is this, and I will highlight like, okay, maybe this plateau part because this person was sick, this person was on holiday, we lost some hours. And you can add some context about team challenges, and then maybe this last part where you're like, oh, this thing that we didn't completely finish, well, that's value that we're already starting for the future sprints, not necessarily this one. You can also then use the burn down towards team better, as in you can grab the burn down for the team, make it publicly available, and just evaluate for them. Like for instance, let's say it's a plateau, and like on day 9 of the sprint, it's like a steep fall down. And you can have a conversation like, what's going on? Are our tasks too big? Because I see the burn down is too high. Not towards your business, but towards the team. And velocity can then be used as team capacity, not as like a metric for like your team is performing or underperforming. It can be a guideline in planning to warn the team that they're overcommitting. For instance, let's say the team is like really, they're excited, they see the refinement, the planning, yeah, this feature, we're excited, we want to go, and then I'm here, sure, but based on your estimations that you did, this is like 55 story points. Normally, stably, you do like 33. The team will be like, oh, maybe we should like, this stuff can maybe wait for later. On the other hand, towards PO, product owner, it's also good. It's like a guideline to indicate even ahead of time when they're planning and starting to prepare the black book. It's like, hey, generally speaking, this is how much capacity we have. And PO can start planning whether the value that is probably should or should not fit within that capacity to begin with. Okay, moving past my fruit bowl experiment, which I'm, by the way, very proud of. It was amazing. Moving on. That's the control part. So now I want to talk a bit about understanding the development process. And I'll start with a very simple Kanban board. This is the Agile process, right? You have stuff that's to do, in progress, and done. Okay, cool. We then go to our review sessions, and it's like, well, our burn out looks like a very straight line, and then it just falls off at the end. So and then what actually happened? Go talk with the team, and it's like, well, our process doesn't really align with it. It's like, what do you mean? Well, we do some internal testing. Okay, not a problem. We'll just add the QA column. Aha, more context. All right. Sprint goes, you evaluate the burn down chart, and yes, so you notice there's a bunch of stuff in progress and in QA, and it's like better, but it's still in progress, stays still pretty long, and I see developers are taking more and more tickets and not cleaning tickets to QA. What's going on? It's like, all right, we do code quality as well. There we go, in the review. So now we have more context in that. What allows the Scrum Master and to some extent product owner to do is now, instead of talking about like why is stuff in progress, now it's like you can talk about like why is something maybe stuck in QA, or why is now something maybe stuck in review, which is not the actual coding of the thing, but there is additional processes that you need to keep in mind. But we're not done yet. Maybe stuck in QA for long, but then is it being tested? Now we're just waiting for it to release. Well, you can add the ready to deploy state for that. Testing is done. Can be deployed to production, and then it's done. And then some genius in the team says, yeah, but deploying and releasing is not the same thing. All right, we'll add deployed and released. So now we went from 3 columns with very little context to suddenly 6 columns where you have a much clearer view of what actually what is happening in your sprint and what your team is actually dealing with. Similar to the 4 columns in the estimation, also makes it much easier if there's a problem with one of the columns. The discussion like what's wrong with that one is much simpler than talking about everything at once. That's only one part though. If you then ask like why is something maybe stuck in progress or why does it take too long, there is a very nice word that gets tossed around, which managers tend to hate and developers too for different reasons. It's technical debt. This is a situation that sadly happens all too often. For the customers and the stakeholders, that's what their kitchen looks like. Looks amazing, they're really happy with it. You talk to the developers and they're like, wow, that looks like this. Why I bring this up is because it's important to know in a team, you know what the motivators are for every part of that team. Clients want this because they want to be able to sell it. People want it in their homes, that's great. But what value are developers actually delivering? Well, for developers, there's an additional part of, well, we also want our code to look good and to work and to actually have time to refactor the old stuff and things along those lines. It's a very big motivator that a developer can also be proud of the product that they delivered on a technical level, not just what looks shiny for the client. We'll go a bit deeper into that. What can you do for that? Well, you can translate technical debt. And as you can see from my picture, I mean towards the product manager or stakeholders and not necessarily inside the team. What do I mean by that? Well, solving tech debt improves overall product, though not always immediately visible. I'll give some examples. Paying back the debt can also be bigger value than actually building new things. So, as examples, and these are all examples from my current active project. To begin with, we have a very old database structure. It doesn't really work. Our lookup times are insane. So as soon as someone presses search, I think they're stuck for like 5 seconds, give or take, depending on how much the search is. And I think even at one point we deployed to production and we had to increase the memory size because they went out of memory. So, business improvement, well, if we can spend some time adding Elasticsearch and improving the database, search time for users will be improved by X seconds. I don't know the actual number by heart anymore, but it did actually work. The client was very happy. Another example, refactoring our payment interface, which was horrible. So after we did that, we now have a predictable behavior processing payments. As in the client comes, he pays, he knows exactly what's going to happen. And we on our side also exactly knows what's going to happen, because before we're like, client pays, we're like, well, it's kind of a 50-50 if it succeeds in the right way or not. Actually happened. It allowed for support for multiple payment portals, like PayPal, for instance. Not implemented yet, but it could be an option, which gives our stakeholders an option like, okay, maybe not just credit card is an option. Maybe I also have some other ones, like PayPal, for instance, which they didn't have access to before. And well, no issues with payment means faster revenue, and which stakeholder doesn't like money, right? The third one was a bit more, took a bit longer to explain. We had everything synchronous, and we wanted everything async instead. So what that meant, and especially the last part was interesting, so it means users who are paying, they needed to wait for their invoice because everything was synchronous. And we changed it, so like, well, you go to payment, you pay everything in like a minute, 2 minutes, and about 10 minutes later, the invoice pops up in your email box, which was what our competitors or like other stores in the eShop space were also doing. So now the payment process on our end was just as quick as theirs. They jumped on that refactor really fast. So this is for legacy refactors. But for the next part, I'd like to quote an old colleague of mine and a friend who said that there are multiple forms of technical debt. First is old legacy code that no one wants to touch anymore, sort of related with what I just spoke about. Cutting corners to deliver sooner, also related. And then there's the third one, which is mostly forgotten, but it's adding unnecessarily complexity too early. I'll very quickly read it out. So we often forget about this third form. We add something that we might need in the future, like going for like a complex architecture very soon, adding tools that are way too complex for what we need at the moment, or adding code to cover edge cases that don't really exist. So doing that, we buy into tech debt. We spend time and resources on things that we need someday. and things in the code that are not supposed to be there get in the way of things that are supposed to be there, and they're all part of technical debt. So how do you solve it? Well, usually it's like, yeah, we'll just solve it next sprint. Here's the thing with tech debt. Debt towards code is just the same as debt towards a bank. If you don't pay it 1 month, it'll be double the next month. If you don't pay it that one, it'll be double the next month after that. Sooner or later, you're going to have to deal with it. Luckily, there's ways to do that. Move, please. There we go. What we're doing in my team is now we started leveraging sprint goals versus capacity. That sounds bad, but it'll make sense in a second. So sprint goal covers business side, right? And the value that we want to create for a client. So what value are we creating for stakeholders? And what problems are we solving for those stakeholders? All good. Development team covers the implementation side of things. Okay, what needs to be done to create that value? What needs to be done to improve the current system to reach that value, hence the refactoring part. And for that, if you go back to my matrix before, this is why the refactoring is a column there, because we include the refactoring of a feature or an element needed to create value inside the estimation itself. So refactoring is already covered in our value estimation. And the last one, and this is important, creating value is not the same as becoming a feature factory. It's not because you have 40 story points. 40 story points need to all be like features, features, features. No. You can actually, team capacity does not need to be fully booked with features. I would actually argue shouldn't be fully booked with features. So what this does, if you create this space, is you empower developers to come into planning with tasks for their own improvements themselves. It kind of solves that discussion, or it tries to solve the discussion of developers complaining how we can never refactor code. To which at this point my PO and my just reply like, yes, but where is your task where you told us that you want to refactor this code? And I was like, oh, we can do that? Well, yes, you can. And then, okay, it takes a bit of time. It doesn't happen snip and overnight, sadly. Would be great, but it doesn't happen like that. But over time, yes, they start seeing issues, tasks start popping up, and then you go into refinement, and one of the developer is like, I know these feature tasks, but we have refined also task A, B, and C for refactoring. Can we please take them into planning? And then I'm like, okay, great, gets into planning, and they work as well on stabilizing the system as well as working on new value for the client. That's the developer side of things. But now we have developers who know that they can refactor. So how do we even things out so it doesn't become like now fully developer focused? Well, for that, the developers also need to understand the business value. Not only the business needs to understand the developers. What often happens is like, so what's the question? Like, why are you making this? Like, we have no idea why. So the first contact point for that is the product owner. They're the one who holds the roadmap. They have the business. They talk with stakeholders, yada, yada. So you can improve a few things off the bat. You can encourage your PO to do user acceptance testing with your dev team. We did a workshop in our case, so like, hey, let's everyone sit in a room for two hours. We have a Miro board up. Use the app and start writing what you don't like. I think registration was a really big one in our case, if I remember. But that gives your developers a better understanding of how your product is actually being used. You can ask the question, like, when's the last time you actually tried to use the product that you're making? You'll be surprised with some of the answers, I think. Also, you can, in that way, after doing that, you can now encourage your team to give feedback to PO as if what happens if they were users, and then they can also share like, hey, I don't like this, instead of having to wait for an external to do that. Equally to the team, also ourselves as Scrum Masters, like when is the last time you used your product that your team is making? Would also be a surprising answer to that question, I think, if I asked it of many of us. However, are POs the only one? I don't think so. We also have UI and UX engineers right now. Why is that helpful? Well, UI and UX engineers, they work very closely with PO and stakeholders. They do that to make user journeys and do a deep dive into what problems stakeholders want to solve. So they get to see up close in conversation with stakeholders, like, hey, this is the problems we have, this is what we want to solve. Things that usually the development team does not have direct access to. They are discovery focused, not delivery. So while the dev team is like trying to deliver value, the UI and UX is trying to assist PO in discovering the value that actually the stakeholder wants. It's a discussion of like, stakeholder comes in, I want this. And then it's like, are you sure? Maybe you can try and explain to me what problem you have, and maybe you'll have a different way of solving it. They help with that. But looping them into Agile can be a challenge. It's not so easy. Because usually they work ahead or entirely separate from the team. They're not really embedded with the development team at all. And they can be seen as a bottleneck. If you're working with any mobile people, it's like, yeah, we can make this, but I can't yet because the design is not ready. Okay, like when can you start working? Like, can you start doing something? Well, at least give me a wireframe. You could talk to the designers like, well, I've not finished my investigation yet, so I don't have it yet. So automatically feature goes down the road for 2 weeks. We can improve that a little bit. So we can do Agile UI UX. And this is actually an ongoing experiment for me still, so it's still work in progress. But if you look at it, the UI UX engineers have basically the same motivators as software developers. Code depth for software devs, well, not fully finished UI UX, or maybe screen they're not entirely happy with. Refactoring then comes a review of all the UI UX with newly discovered information, as they do continuously talk to stakeholders. Good quality code, good quality UI UX. And while the software developers deliver value through functionality, UI UX engineers do it through UI UX or through the discovery that they do. So what does it look like if you embed them together? Well, you combine discovery and delivery in the same sprint. So discovery can be part of your product roadmap. Tasks for them can be planned and prioritized just as well as for any software developer. They can also be estimated, although slightly different, but I'll get to that. And the workflow is actually exactly the same, just slightly different roles. For instance, in review, while you have code reviews, UI and UX engineers just as easily have their peers review their designs as well. QA, well, maybe not the QA engineer, could be, but at the same time, when one of their discoveries is finished, it's also reviewed by PO and stakeholders in the same way. Can use the same state, and the board means exactly the same thing. Just one additional thing, there's an adjusted flow for UI and UX review a little bit, in the sense that any changes to UI UX that you make, they're new discoveries. So while code review changes, something goes back into do can be done on the spot. For UI, it takes a bit longer, because a new discovery needs to be planned into the roadmap just like any other discovery. They also get their own fancy UX estimation matrix. This is still a work in progress, hence the question marks. But so far, we came up with 3 questions, as in how many unknowns, but this time from business side, not from coding side. What's the effort of making this discovery, and how many iterations do you roughly think that this will take? And then, because we didn't want to jump straight to story points, we started with something easy, and we're doing just t-shirt sizes just to give like a rough idea. But we're working towards getting like a more numerical value at some point. We're just not quite there yet. So what does that actually give us? Well, we talked a bit about the development side and the business side. So now we have continuous collaborative discovery, or at least that's what I like to call it. So responsibility is no longer on PO to hold all the business answers, because you have your UX and UI engineers who's working with the team on a day-to-day basis. They're in the same meetings, they're doing the same things. So they can now answer questions that PO, when she's maybe not available, or like maybe it's like coffee chat, you catch another person. It's no longer one person to hold all the answers. Additional benefit, the development team gets a sneak peek on what business problems are, how they're being solved, and why they're being solved the way that they are. Something that they previously would not really know. And they get to know the whole process instead of just the answer at the end. Good thing is here, then, because they see the whole process, they can actually give input on those solutions as they see it happening before even starting to implement. So you don't end up with features that you make, and it goes to production, and then stakeholders like, this is not what I wanted at all. Now, because of that, discovery and adaptation becomes continuous and in collaboration with the entire team at all times, which is something everyone is very happy with. So why am I talking about this, and why do I think it's important to know these things? Well, I think Scrum Masters are team leaders of a team, or we're supposed to be. But I strongly believe that leadership is something that's offered, not given. You can't just give leadership to someone who doesn't want it. And you can't really offer it when you don't really understand or see the challenges that they are dealing with. So spending time to learn all facets of an agile process, including the dev and design one, puts you in a position where we can suggest improvements to the team instead of just complaining and waiting for them to come up with them out of thin air. And with that, I close my presentation. So any questions?
Any questions?
Don't be shy.
Colleagues, maybe you have something.
Oh,
Was he telling the truth at all? Yes? So you can comment on what he was saying.
What are your relationship with the product owner?
Oh, we're going to like the...
Uh-oh.
I have an amazing product owner. She's the best.
We have one more.
How do you find the right balance of investing effort into refactoring and feature building?
Trial and error a little bit. As soon as this topic comes up and you open the door to, now we can refactor, the first reaction is like you get like this waterfall of like, hey, all this stuff doesn't work. Fine. But then it's a discussion of like, okay, but what do we need to do now? Like at the end of the day, yes, like you need to write nice code, and I know that it's something that's very valuable for them. But at the end of the day, we're still making software for a stakeholder. So it's a case of grabbing the roadmap and then figuring out together with them, okay, we need to make this feature. What on backend doesn't work and is a priority to then refactor, and then build a roadmap for refactoring as well as for features. So if you then, so you put your PO and your tech lead and me in the same space, and you go over, and this is what I meant with the translating the business value, where say like, these are the things that are really bad right now. We see that these things are coming up in your roadmap. These things are going to block that, and they need to be taken care of even before or at the same time as making this value. And then it's developers can't have all their way. It's kind of like toning down where it's like, okay, we'll just build a priority, and eventually we'll get through that. And then also showing them sprint by sprint that when they come with issues, you actually listen to what they have to say, and you don't just immediately say like, no, we need to do this. No, you make it an active part of talking about what you do in the sprint. Like you show from, like it's like leading by example kind of thing. Like you show that when they bring a problem, you actually listen and try to tie it into, okay, so if we do that, this is what value will be creating kind of thing. And then in the beginning, it'll be a bit rocky, yes, but like after 2, 3, 4 sprints, depending, it'll even out, and you'll have like you should have a somewhat healthy Discord.
Anybody else? Okay, so probably if we're ending with a question, so I'll still remind you that you can evaluate your colleague. Please be critical, okay?
And team lead.
Okay, so now you have to balance between the pressure, and the reality. So before you all leave, I want to tell you another thing. So here's the Menti for Agile Tour Vilnius conference itself. So please leave your feedback, because if you leave your feedback, your name and your email, you are participating in a contest, and you might win presents from our partners, Aurelia Books. So they send some really cool Agile-related books, so you can win something. We have quite a lot, so high chances. So please, thank you everybody for coming in here today. We have this last presentation in this track. Now I encourage everybody to go to the main track. There will be the keynote again and the closing speech. So thank you everybody. Hope it was an interesting day, and see you another year as well.